Good morning. Good morning to all of you. As a project manager, I wish to welcome all of you to this second international workshop for the MOSPI project. And as it happened for the first workshop, I hope that on this occasion we have the chance to share views in the light of the first results deriving from the micro simulation model of the social protection system that we have in Italy, and also to include it within a broader framework as the European one. But before giving the floor to the institutional representatives of the three partners, I'd like to provide you with some practical information. Please remember that those of you that are not speaking shall mute one's microphone. And as regards the presentations, each speaker shall share one screen and use and manage the slides autonomously. And as to the audience, the questions shall be asked through the chat window. So if you have any questions, please write your questions in the window of the Q&A session, and we will share them with the speakers. The questions can be asked at the end of each session. So enjoy the day, and Mr. Barbieri, you have the floor. Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. On behalf of the Minister of the Treasury, I wish to welcome all of you to the second workshop on the MOSPI project. And unfortunately, due to the well-known circumstances, it is necessary to hold this workshop remotely, but hopefully we're going to have the third one in person. We organized everything in order to facilitate the participation of all members in order to allow everyone to contribute to the discussion. So I hope that through this communication method, it is very important to comply with some basic requirements. So today we're going to present some results, and the results relating to the third edition of the project of the TDIM, whose main purpose is to broaden the analysis from different points of view, and also to consider the suitability of the entire social protection system, and not just the pension system stricto sensu. And of course, in order to do so, it was necessary to enrich the analytical structure of the model and to include within it additional information and additional data. This required extensive activity, for which we thank all of those that contributed to it. And of course, it is I'm referring to our economists and the collaborators from SOJ and the scientific staff, whom I thank for their contribution. And I wish to thank the institutions that helped us to enrich the data we are using in this analysis. So ISTAT, IMSS, COVIP, the Ministry of the Interior. And within our ministry, all of the activities were carried out not just by the Treasury, but also from the Department of the Finance and from the General Accounting Department. And so Jay was very important for its contribution. And also, well, the institutions I mentioned not only provided data, but also participated in the analysis carried out, and also helped us to better understand how to shape and interpret a number of models. And also, it is important to refer to the database on income and wealth of households given by the Bank of Italy. And I also wish to thank all of you, the participants and the speakers, and I really wish that This day is going to contribute to the dissemination of the activities carried out, but also to the additional stimuli to the activities that are going to be carried out in the next few months, as the main goal is to close the project at the end of this year by obtaining important results in terms of development of the techniques used, but also in terms of the results obtained. So I do believe that the assessment of the suitability of social protection is very important in a situation in which we're actually heading to a period in which the effects of the demographic decrease will add up to the working careers that are not seamless any longer, as well as changes in professions are somehow more frequent. So the main item here is to understand how the social protection system is going to be in the next few decades, but that is absolutely important. And in the future, I believe we'll have the chance to enrich this analysis, and I'm thinking about the demographic aspects, as well as the additional activity in defining and modeling the savings and investment models, as well as the saving approach, and also the economic growth, which is fundamental in this connection. So I don't believe that this effort is going to finish with this project. Conversely, I'm sure that this is going to mark an important step forward. So thank you. And now I give the floor to my colleagues from INAB, for the Bodolini Foundation, and I wish you a fruitful day. Thank you. Thank you. The floor to Professor Fetta. Good morning. I hope the connection works and that you can hear me. I see you and hear you well. So I would like to quickly underline that this research, which is so complex and so relevant, involved three main subjects. That is to say, INAP, the Ministry of Finance, and the Brodolini Foundation. So this set of subjects, in this subject, well, INAP was the lead partner and the coordinator. And I also wish to underline that this project was carried out thanks to a bid issued by the European Union, and therefore the success in approving this project represents a particular quality and value of the project. And of course, we have to acknowledge the contribution of those that worked within the project, as well as it is important to thank all of the subjects that contributed to it, as it was previously mentioned. And in particular, a special thank goes to the project manager, Mrs. Irene Brunetti, who coordinated the entire set of activities. As everyone knows, the welfare system in Italy and in most of the developed countries is affected by a number of criticalities that need a deep reform. The entire welfare system is involved, and this project is aimed at a particular aspect relating to welfare and social protection, that is to say, the pension system. And it is mainly focused on this aspect because maybe it represents the most urgent issue to be tackled. Some factors were mentioned already. So factors that are at the basis of the exacerbation of all of the difficulties, that is to say, the change of the demographic structure and the extension of life expectancy, and also the delay in accessing the labor market due to both the extension of training pathways and also the period needed to find a job. And thirdly, as it was mentioned, the discontinuity and sometimes also the irregularity, I would say, and the fragmentation of the employment pathways, which do not allow to gather the contribution needed to continue along the pathway of the pension schemes we had in the past. Furthermore, we have to consider the dynamics when it comes to the growth and the interest rates, and also the savings and consumption trends. So the entire economic system as a whole is affected by a structural change. So it seems to me that this project has the task on the one side to fine-tune the calculation techniques as well as the econometric models that shall be able to capture the entire set of variables that determine deep changes and needs for reform in the entire system. This is on the one side. And on the other side, by entering data in this model, it is possible to describe future scenarios and at the same time to provide, on the basis of the structural evolution, to provide the main tools needed to assess the different options in terms of solutions available, and which concern the public pension systems and private pension systems, in order to assess all of them and to provide decision makers with, and as well as provide economic operators, generally speaking, that work in the areas of social and security contributions. So provide them with a number of tools, allowing them to develop the foundations needed in terms of knowledge in order to make the necessary choices for the future. So this workshop, which represents a midterm phase and which takes stock of the methodological approaches relating to the development of the model and also the adoption of the econometric techniques that are the suitable ones in order to grasp all of the variables. Well, we, of course, look forward to get information relating to the model in order to use it and implement it in order to develop systems that shall be able to define the advantages and the risks and the positive features of the various solutions that are proposed in order to solve the problems that appear, and to always be in the position of updating the pension schemes in consideration of the evolution of the economic and financial structure of the country. So I wish all of you a fruitful day, and I will follow some of the sessions because today I also have to go and get my anti-COVID vaccination. So lucky me, and I'll join you later. But there will be all of the colleagues, and I will, of course, read the documents presented today. So see you later or in the afternoon. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Fadda. Now the floor to Professor Ciccarone from the Bertolini Foundation. Thank you. Thank you, and good morning. Good morning to all of you. I'm really glad to greet you all on behalf of the Brodolini Foundation. And I'm also glad to see the representatives from INEP and the Ministry of the Economy and Finance on the second workshop within the MOSPI project. As mentioned by Mr. Fadda, funded through EU funds and DG Employment and Social Affairs of the Commission. I wish to thank INEP, and I'll do so by thanking the President, Mr. Fadda, because the coordination carried out in all of the phases within the project has been extraordinary. And I also wish to thank the Ministry of Finance and Mr. Barbieri, because we've been collaborating for many years on these topics. And this is actually the third project we are carrying out together. And for us, it's been a pleasure and also an occasion for mutually learning additional information. The main purpose for this project is the modernization of the social security system, and especially in a situation of change that we are well aware of, and which I'm not deepening today, but which has to do with also with the digitalization of the economy and of the society, not only in Italy, of course, and as it was already mentioned, in a labor market that is rapidly and continuously evolving and changing, also in consideration of the aging of population, which at the moment is going ahead at a high speed. So our foundation has been analyzing the situation for many years now. In our works, we've tried to give evidence, not only in terms of changes, but also in terms of policies to be adopted. And we underlined on several occasions the possibility to better manage those changes by fostering access to social protection and also coordinating the activities carried out by the various stakeholders involved, both in terms of changes and in policies. These activities started in 2019 and is part of a set of initiatives that the Commission funded in order to deal with the European social pillar, a pillar that focuses on the need to promote social security and the social protection of all the European citizens, and which are penalized in different ways in the different countries, but due to, for instance, uncertain labor contracts and careers, which have an impact, of course, on their social security. So the crisis, which is not just related to health, but also it's also an economic and social crisis, makes an informed analysis urgent, especially when it comes to the need and the possibility to broaden the social protection measures that are available to the European citizens, by also trying to understand what are the ways in which workers can be somehow considered as workers can become somehow more uniform from the, let's say, treatment standpoint. So I share what was said by the previous speakers. That is to say, we certainly have the urgency to improve the social protection systems, and this is absolutely relevant. And I consider that the data set that, of course, checks the information of IMSS with the information of ISTAT, and then also the dynamic microsimulation system, which is involved in this approach. Well, these tools are on the one side very much ambitious because they are now leading the analysis very much close to the scientific analysis. And I believe that this information is becoming, and these tools are now a need for all of us, because we increasingly need to provide informed analysis and quantitative tools able to manage and steer the decision makers and policymakers and guide them in the decisions they are adopting. So today we will present all of these tools and we will talk about them with experts, distinguished experts in these topics. And the main idea is to share views on the evidence generated by the project. I wish to thank, since now, all of the participants for their contributions that will be shared today. I'm sure that all of the suggestions and ideas that will be provided are going to allow us to improve and fine-tune our activity and to make these tools even more effective, hence allowing to foster a better design of our policies. And I apologize because I will not be able to follow the workshop because I am actually teaching, and I stopped just because I wanted to greet all of you and thank the partners that are involved together with me in the opening remarks. And I thank, of course, Professor Papieri and Professor Fadda, and also the institutions that they represent, because I consider this collaboration as absolutely useful, not just with a view to the project, but also in consideration of the improvements that we can introduce in our country, also thanks to the even tiny contribution we can provide. So thank you. I wish to thank all of the participants, and I apologize. But for university professors, the rule is always the same. Students come first. So apologies for that. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Professor. At this point, I think we can give the floor to Mr. Riccardo Conti in order to open the first panel. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Irene. Thank you for the introduction. I'm sharing the screen first. And the presentation will represent our main guide. So let's start with the first panel of the day, which is a sort of introductory panel. We'll talk about the data involved and the structure of the model and the recent innovations introduced in the latest version, which is 3.0. So we're going to start with a presentation lasting 45 minutes by Stefano Boscolo and Riccardo Conti, which is myself. And Stefano has is then going to then share the information with the discussants. Stefano deals with macro simulation and tax benefits and collaborates with us through the Brodolini Foundation. My name is Riccardo Conti and I work for SOJ. For those of you that don't know it, it is a company whose main shareholder is the Ministry of Finance, which provides advice to the Ministry of the Economy and Finance, and I collaborate with DG1 of the Treasury. And in the last 6 years, I've been dealing with the development of this model that is TDIM. We have Kais Deckers and Maria Luisa Maitina with us, and then they will add, of course, all the things I'm not mentioning. ACE works for the Federal Planning Bureau in Belgium and is a point of reference for macro simulation at an international level. It's chaired the Macro Simulation Association, and for what in the last year is been chairing the ex-policy committee on pension adequacy. Maria Luisa Maitina works for IPE, which is the social institution for the economic planning of Tuscany, and she's a statistician, and she deals with the assessment of the distribution aspects as well as the assessment of the related policies. And from the organization standpoint, Stefano and I are going to make our presentation, 45 minutes, then I'll take the floor and give the floor to the discussants, so Gaze and Maria Luisa, and then eventually other speakers. And then the interaction will start. And if time allows, we'll also read the questions asked by participants that can, of course, ask their questions at any time, and we'll read the questions later. So what are we going to talk about? Well, some general aspects relating to the D team, and then its history, and then general features, an overall description. Then we're going to talk about the data set we are using, the general structure by modules for the module, and then we'll focus on the demographic module that, of course, is the foundation of what happens within the module. And then I'll give the floor to Stefano, who is going to deal with two main items. That is to say, the correction we introduced in self-employment income, a correction I introduced thanks to the information we gathered recently and which come from the income statements, so thanks to the collaboration with the Ministry of Finance. And the second focus will be on weight calibration relating to the starting data set through a number of re-weighting procedures. So let's start now.
So what is TDIM is a dynamic microsimulation model, and it's appropriate for medium and long-term projections. It treats time as discrete, it has a sequential structure, and socioeconomic events occur within TDIM based on conditional transition probabilities which are estimated externally. It uses alignment procedures on a number of demographic and macroeconomic dimensions, and we will get back to this. And TDIM has been developed on the LIAM2 open source platform that was also developed by the Federal Planning Bureau and also by Haystacker, who is with us today. So historically, TDIM was developed in 3 phases, coinciding with 3 European projects, so the first between 2010 and 2012, the next between 2014 and 2016, and the current one is going to end in 2021 with the final conference. In the current project, we have been expanding and improving our database, and we will talk about this later. We are also improving the representativeness of the sample. In terms of modules, we are also including pensioners, workers. We have expanded the disability module, which in the previous version was just sketched out. We developed a sort of a tax benefit model, which we are going to illustrate in the third panel, a wealth module, and a migration module. And we will devote a few slides to this too. So what is TDIM for? TDIM was created as a model to evaluate the adequacy of the Italian pension system. So the published results generally include average retirement age, average duration of retirement, replacement rate, Gini index, income inequalities, and because it is a microsimulation model, results are usually proposed based on a number of sensitivity scenarios. So it is a microsimulation model, therefore it is not a forecasting model. And the goal of these models, as many have said, authoritative speakers, is not really making forecasts, but rather answering questions and test a number of scenarios. And today we are going to focus on scenarios in the third panel. Over time, TDIM moved from being a model only focused on the adequacy of public pensions, and it moved on to a model which is aimed at assessing the Italian production system as a whole. To conclude this first part, what are our forthcoming deliveries? Well, the MOSPI project. We are also working on some parallel projects, again at the international level. The methodology of the migration module, which I will be speaking about later, is going to be further discussed in a note delivered by a special interest group on microsimulation, which is a part of the INGRID 2 project. And last but not least, the results produced at the baseline level by TDIM 3.0 are going to be included in a note that is going to be disseminated together with the Pension Adequacy Report 2021, which is going to come out in the spring. Then after the presentation has been concluded, we were going to work at a presentation paper on the TDIM 3.0 version with a focus on several scenarios. So let us move on to data. What is the core of the TDIM data set? Well, this was achieved by matching survey data contained in the EU-SILC report with the administrative data that are possessed by the Italian National Institute. The merging procedure is carried out through individual tax codes, codici fiscali, which are anonymized. And this merged data set is called AD-SILC. A version of AD-SILC always accompanied TDIM in all its version to 1.0, 2.0, and the current one. AD-SILC is an unbalanced panel data set that includes all SILC waves between 2004 and 2017, and the people interviewed, individual interviews, are associated to all the information included in IMPS of working population and pensioners. So in terms of information content, from the SILC, we've got some 254,000 individuals that are followed up for up to 4 years because it's a panel in which data rotated. And from SILC, we've got socioeconomic features, civil status, education, perceived health status. At the IMPS level, we've got all the information that have to do with pensions, disability, old age, survivor, and working history. Of course, we've got many more observations, over 6 million for a period that goes from 1922 to 2018. Every person interviewed in SILC appears with more than one observation per year within IMPS, depending on the situation in that year. What are the main new features of the current 3.0 version? We've got 5 SILC waves, 2013, 2017. There are some 50,000 people more, so 25% in terms of increase. And particularly, we have added information coming from new sources, specifically through cooperation with the finance department, from tax returns and from the cadastre. For 4 of the 4 SILC waves, 2010, 12, 13, and 16. This information are used to develop the taxation module, and on the other, it is used to impute information concerning wealth related to property. Information from tax returns are always merged on a one-to-one basis. Information concerning the survey of the Bank of Italy on household income and wealth are merged by a statistical matching procedure, which we are going to look at during the second panel. The data were developed to develop the wealth module, and from the SHIY, we obtain information concerning financial health. So what do we do with all this data set at the micro level? First of all, it can be used to analyze dynamics, for instance, within the labor market. And this is something that we are going to look at more in detail in the first part of the second panel. Then the regression parameters, which are used in TDIM, are based on estimations which run on the entire AD-SILC data set, and they are used to grant transition probabilities to a number of processes concerning, for instance, occupational status. And last but not least, AD-SILC, it's based on a single extract of AD-SILC 2016 with all information concerning administrative sources, which I just mentioned. Well, this extraction is then used for our simulation, and we are going to talk about the procedure for setting up these data sets later on within this panel. So not just microdata, but we also use macro data, exogenous data that are used to align some patterns within the simulations. The use of alignment procedure is something that is highly debated within the field of dynamic macrosimulation, and we will look at it later on with our discussants. So what do we use these alignments for? Well, first of all, to align population changes with the Europol projections 2019 concerning mortality rate, fertility rate, immigration. And as far as macroeconomic variables such as employment rate, inflation, GDP growth, productivity, we use the most recent assumptions of the GIM report of 2021, which is going to be published in the spring. The other sources for our alignments are here on the slide. We should perhaps mention COVIP, the Italian Vigilance Committee on Private Pension Plans, with which the Treasury has started cooperation for the further development of the submodule on private pension schemes. At the current moment, COVIP data are used to for the third pillar adhesions. So future possible implementations at the level of the data set. Well, we have already got in touch with the Interior Ministry to access information from registers such as ARE and ANPR concerning the migration phenomenon. At the current moment, we need micro information concerning emigration. In terms of immigration, we have within the silk individuals that are immigrants. If they have employment contracts, they are also within IMPS too, so we can tell something about this phenomenon. We've got other difficulties or issues, but we can perhaps look at them later. At the level of immigration, we don't have anything because we've got some silk units that sometimes disappear from our survey, and we can assume that they have emigrated, but we don't know where they went or why. So information that we could perhaps gain if we were to look at the registers of IRA and ANPR. Other aspects are the extension of the connection between AD Silk and the tax return and cadastral data that currently only concern only 4 of the silk waves that we have at our disposal at the moment. In a possible TDM 4.0 or 5.0, well, perhaps a spin-off from the model could be more focused on health. We currently have a disability inability module. We could develop it, making it a health care module using the silk data on perceived health, and perhaps connecting also administrative innovation on health, for instance, information concerning the healthcare card, tessera sanitaria. Of course, complex data such as these raise issues from the standpoint of privacy. So after finishing the overview on data, let us look at the general structure of our model, which is going to guide all our presentations. Every module is then going to be dealt with in the various panels in greater detail. Naturally, we have a starting data set, which is our starting sample, AD Silk 2016, so the silk extraction containing the related administrative data. And then this sample passes through the module structure. We've got a demographic module, labor market, pension, wealth, and tax benefit. The main processes for each model are described on the slide. And what is worth bearing in mind is that TDIM has a sequential structure. The sequence is not so much given by this logical module-based structure, but by the sequence of processes. And some processes which logically refer to one module could also be found in different places of the model. I can make an example. Perhaps in the wealth module, for instance, what we simulate is inheritance because it is part of the wealth module, but actually inheritance in practical terms is something that is part of that comes after the mortality process. So it is within the demographic module. And in the wealth module, what we also simulate is consumption, because from consumption you can draw data on saving and the accumulation of wealth. And obviously it is part of the wealth module, but consumption within the module is dealt with at the end of all the processes as the last process after the tax benefit module. Well, because we can estimate consumption and therefore saving only when the net income definition was completed. So some additional information on the demographic module, which we're not going to look at anymore in the subsequent panels. But it is the backbone, of course, on which we base the rest of the model. In the demographic module, people are, for instance, looked at from the standpoint of aging and mortality. Mortality is differentiated in terms of gender and age. So here you can see in brackets no heterogeneity, in the sense that no other dimensions such as income, wealth, occupation, whether people live in a city or in a countryside, marital status, well, all these things are not considered. And then we're going to get back again on these themes. So aging and mortality, then births, international migration, which is a new element in the 3.0 module, disability, education, which is assigned based on parents' education. Of course, all these processes are as they are now. And then on point 6, item 6 and 7, individuals are then moved out of their original household. So point 6, living household, people are leaving their parents' households, and 7 is the marriage market. So people get married, or they go living together, or they divorce. And these last two processes are essential, also the others are, but a model which then estimates inequality and poverty indicators is based on a family income definition. So then the way in which a family is set up, is formed, is essential. A few words on the migration submodule, which is the main innovative element in the 3.0 TDM new version. So why were we interested in building up a migration module? Well, first of all, for demographic issues, without the immigrants, the sample would be reduced in a very marked way, which is what happened in the previous projects in which TDM was a closed model. However, we had to say that we had to establish that migrants could have specific dynamics in the model, and that we could reproduce them also within our model. And we are going to get back on this topic during the second panel on the labor market. So what type of problems did we have? Well, problems were mentioned by many other researchers. Data on the migration phenomenon are not particularly broad. I was talking about the fact that we do not have that much data on the immigrant side, but also immigration data, but also immigration data do present some issues. For instance, in terms of registration, the data we have refers to immigrants that transfer their residence, but in fact, we know that this is not something that always happens. So we are a bit limited, constrained in this sense. And that is why our proposed methodology is a methodology which is quite simple. And I can give you some additional information here, but we're going to have a dedication node produced, which is going to be then placed on the project's website. So first of all, we simulate immigration and emigration separately. So not as an inflow. Then we follow Deckers and Chenard and implement a cloning procedure using the Chenard's pageant algorithm, allowing us to look at this phenomenon from a household perspective. So the units that immigrate or emigrate are household based, but it also allows us to look at individual dimensions. And the ones we chose are age, gender, and area of birth. Italy, European Union, and non-European Union. This is the areas that we have considered. How do we deal with them? Well, we look at alignments. So we use the Europop projections for 2019 that are very detailed. And as far as area of birth, there are no projections. And so we are forced to maintain constant the quotas or shares from area of birth and age group. And so to do that, we use ISTA data. As far as incoming immigrants, the educational level is assigned based on all OECD constant data, constant based on area of origin. Additional information, well, the new immigrants, or I define them as start fresh. We have no information concerning these people except for age, gender, area of birth, and education, which we attribute to them based on OECD data. This is a simplification, but we don't have information, so we thought that we could do this. It's as if immigrants at all age coming to Italy, they started from scratch. They only have this 4 pieces of information to be defined. As far as immigrants are concerned, here too, we have to simplify things because they are just deleted from the simulation. This, of course, leads us to a problem of overestimation because we do not simulate a return immigration. Those who live forever. It doesn't mean that we do not simulate immigration flows by people, for instance, who were born in Italy. We do this, but they're not the same people that exited perhaps or left 5 years before, so they're fresh for us. But so the figures are consistent on average, but we did not follow this thing in the single individuals, so we wouldn't know what these people do when they emigrate abroad because we have not enough data. Some figures, 3 more slides, and then I'll give the floor to Stefano. If we look at the recent trends, immigration flows, inflows are of non-EU origin for the coming years. So you can see that the green bar is the tallest throughout all the simulation years. Something I forgot to say is that in the case of simulations, at this first stage, we get to 2050, we have alignments and our exogenous that would allow us to get to 2070. But for the preliminary results we are illustrating today, we will just look at up to 2050. We've got some computational problems when we have to make complex simulations. As a result of the projections on immigration flows, mortality and fertility rate, the composition of the resident population in Italy is destined to change quite evidently in the 35 years of simulation. We move from 2019, where the population is 89% Italian born, to a 78% in 2050. If we look at the age structure, at aging, this is what we consider when we speak about population demographic crisis. But despite the inflows of immigrants, dependency ratios are destined to grow significantly, and also the median age by gender. And here I make a comparison between the results of TDIM and the Eurostat projections. By construct, these results are very much consistent because TDIM is aligned to Eurostat. So we got to the final slide, future implementations for the demographic module. Well, including heterogeneity in the mortality process. This is particularly interesting when we consider the contribution calculation system that Italy is moving to, a calculation model that includes actuarial neutrality, but only with the mean mortality individual. We know that coefficients are calculated differently depending on genders, marital status, occupation, wealth level. So if none of these categories were to be systematically have an advantage, the problem of neutrality and equity would not be there. But this is not the case, so it would be interesting to include this aspect also within a macro simulation model. And this is something that can be done quite simply at the level of modeling. given the data that we have at the moment on this phenomena. Of course, it would also be interesting to look at return migration in this case too, that the problem is represented by data. We don't know what people do when they are abroad. And last but not least, again here, an issue that we should be dealing with in the future is the development of a health module. So I have finished. I would like to give the floor to Stefano now, and all the best.
Thank you, and good morning. In the time allotted to me, I'll talk about two technical items. That is to say, the amendment made to the model, that is to say, one relating to the self-employment income, and the other one relates to the weights for the sampling activities for the year zero in our simulations. And I will mainly focus on the first aspect because actually we don't know too much about the trends, whereas as to the weighting, well, this is a rather common practice. So the data set, as Ricardo said, is made up of, for instance, in the contributions provided by EMS, and also the labor market module in order to analyze, for instance, transitions and wages. For some categories of employed workers, that is to say, as regards those that are on the left-hand side of income distribution, we see that the main wages of the IMSS contributions do not match the tax returns data. And when I say tax returns data, I'm considering all of them. And this happens because the amount considered for the calculation of social security contributions is not changing if the income in the tax return is lower than the threshold. So if you consider, for instance, 16,000 euros, then if in a tax return I say 5,000 for tax purposes, well, the amount for which I do calculate the security contributions is 16,000 and not 5,000. So actually this mismatch is considered in two main categories. That is to say, craftsmen and on the other side, farmers. And as a first thing, I'd like to show to you a number of statistics, descriptive statistics between the ratio between earnings as declared in tax purposes and earnings for contribution purposes, especially when it comes to the 4 AD silk waves that are linked to tax returns in order to frame the problem. So by only considering the individuals that have, for instance, earnings lower than the threshold included in the slide for each of the tax periods, we do see that nearly 50% is around 1. So there's a good consistency between the information included in tax returns and the information in IMSS contributions. Another thing that must be stressed is the concentration of individuals that we see in the area around 0. But this is rather in line with aggregated statistics relating to tax returns. If, conversely, we linger on, for instance, craftsmen, traders, and farmers with IMSS earnings that are equal to one of the statutory thresholds, then we see that there's a reduction that we saw around 1 we see a reduction in the ratio between declared earnings and EMS earnings. So you probably wondered why I have not mentioned, for instance, freelancers. And the reason is, as we see, that there's a high consistency between EMS earnings and tax returns data. Therefore, the use of, for instance, EMS earnings as contained in the contribution data would underestimate the poverty conditions among self-employed workers, because, of course, the earnings will be much higher than the income included in tax returns. So it is necessary to adjust these incomes, and that is why we use the AD silk and cross-sectional waves matched with tax returns, for instance, in tax periods between 2009, 2011, 2013, and 2015, when we calculate the ratio between earnings as declared for tax purposes and earnings as collected in EMS archives. The method that we used in the correction of self-employed income is the imputation with propensity score matching. So by dividing the data set, both donors and treated, and then also 32 sales were included, and I'll go back to this item in a while. And while defining the data set containing the donors, we have considered those whose stated earnings are known to us. That is to say, those that are self-employed workers only, so the second item. And among the features that these individuals need to have, there should be EMS earnings equal to one of the 19 SICs thresholds that we found in EMS archives. So 12 in terms of months for craftsmen and traders and 7 months for farmers. And these individuals, so included in the donors dataset, should be aged between 16 and 79, and that shall not be in education any longer. So the treated ones are, for instance, the self-employed workers included in the AD Silk panel that meet the requirements under item 2, 3, and 4, but not 1. So for which we don't know what the ratio between earnings as declared for tax purposes and earnings collected in archives is. Let us move on to the sales. As already mentioned, we have 32 sales, so 22 relating to craftsmen and traders that work from 1 to 11 months and divided by threshold and gender, and the other one includes those that work 12 months divided by gender and macro area, and the remaining 2 sales include farmers divided by gender. It is interesting to see how there's a strong concentration of craftsmen and traders that work 12 months, and you see the difference between donors and treated. And of course, this is a result that we partially expected. Now I'm going to show to you some of the results following the entering of this data, especially when it comes to marginal distributions. And I will focus on the kernel density estimate on the left-hand side and quantile plot on the right-hand side. Hence, you see the difference between these 2 charts. What we notice is, as to, for instance, craftsmen and traders, is that the distribution of Y centered is close to the point of reference, although we have some criticalities in the right-hand side of the 2 distributions, as you see the quantile plots. This is not alarming to us because we are interested in the interval between 0 and 1, and I'll go back to this item later. So marginal distributions that do not seem to have any problems as regards, for instance, the craftsmen and traders that work for 12 months. And the same goes for farmers, although they're not included in this chart. Therefore, following the inflation and by considering what is the main goal of this analysis, that is to say, not to underestimate poverty, we are using the ratio in order to keep this information for tax purposes if it is lower than 1. Otherwise, we use the IMSS information included in the archives. We do so because we consider these two phenomena, that is to say, y lower than 1 and y higher than 1, as a different phenomena. In fact, in the second case, y higher than 1, we are talking about a phenomenon that relates to tax evasion. That is to say, the self-employed worker includes in tax return the minimum amount, and although the income is higher, and of course, this is also confirmed by the marginal situation, where, for instance, the imputation is not clear when y is higher than 1. So in any case, as a preliminary attempt, we saw that it's necessary to perform additional controls, especially when it comes to the joint distributions. And we're also aware of the fact that this phenomenon might have a sort of a persistency. So the level of my y and the ratio between IPERF and IMSS earnings can be a predictor of y. That is to say, yt minus 2, and might be a good predictor of y. But unfortunately, the data available at the moment is not allowing us to perform any additional estimation. And I'd like to conclude this first focus by showing to you the distribution of self-employed workers before and after the adjustment. So you see, for instance, what the difference is, and it's taken from the tax returns, and the post imputation complies with F, although we see that there's a reduction in the peak that we had at the center, that is to say, containing all the crafts and traders that work for 12 months. Let us now move on to the second focus, that is the one linked to weight calibration. And also the reweighting is a common practice when it comes to the simulation, maybe somehow more in static microsimulation. But the reasons for that are always the same, actually. So the main goal is to improve the overall representativeness of some dimensions relating to the base year, mainly regarding TDIM for 2015. And while we're trying to improve these items, we always need to pay attention not to introduce a distortion in the silk, in the IT6 cross-sectional wave. And the methodology used refers to an article dating back to 1992, that is to say, the Deville and Sarnall, and generalized ranking procedure using the thread-wide data command. So this is the one included in the IT Silk survey of 2016. Then, what are the dimensions included in the calibration? Well, on the one side, we have the ones used in the calibration of the silk weight. And of course, we don't want to introduce any distortion in the representativeness relating to the original weight. And as you see, we have both households and individuals included. You see the difference? And on the other side, we have additional dimensions we We consider the distribution of national population by gender, area of birth, and level of education. Then distribution of households by number of family members, or the distribution of recipients of retirement income by income classes, and other dimensions that you'll find in the slide. But of course, this does not include all of the dimensions included in the calibration algorithm. And then, before starting the simulation, we multiply individuals by calibrated weights, the calibrated weights given to them. And we, of course, move from the sampling to the population we are analyzing. So 100 samples, 200,000 households. And also we define the one that gets the best representativeness. And for this reason, maybe you wonder why we are sampling 200,000 households. We do so because this is the sample dimension needed in order to provide a good representativeness of cloned migrants and migrants that Ricardo mentioned before. And now I move on to some statistics aimed at providing you with a general idea of the representativeness of the base year of the TDIM. And I'll do so by considering, for instance, the items included and the total numbers gathered by our sample following the exposure and the sampling that I'll define TDIM. And I'll compare these two results with the total amounts obtained by using the silk weight, which is not calibrated out of the non-weighted sample. And I'll do so in order to check benefits in terms of representativeness between our sample and our known excluded sample by using the original silk weight. So from item 1 to item 4, I listed the same dimensions used in the calibration of the original silk weight. And then so this is the information I entered in the previous slide. And in the charts, I am overlapping the total distribution and the total amounts within TDIM. And as you see, all of the spots are on the lines cutting the charts. So we are not losing representativeness when it comes to the individual distributions in the weighting of the original silk weight. The same goes for the distribution of households by region. And of course, this is what is used in the weighting of the silk weight, the original silk weight. And as regards the distribution of taxpayers by class of income, then I'd like to clarify one thing, because when I say taxpayers, I mean both those that pay taxes and those that actually do not pay taxes. So what I'm showing to you is actually the frequency of overall income that is subject to tax payments. And here we see that the main procedure we implemented allows us to marginally improve the representativeness of most of the category of individuals considered. And in fact, the yellow bars are very close to the red ones in the vast majority of cases. And most of all, the procedure we implemented allows us to partially correct the underestimation that we observe both in the number of items and in the overall income relating to taxpayers. So the use of the silk weight would entail an estimation of nearly 20 billion euros, whereas our procedure, the one that we implemented, allows us to reduce this underestimation to 10 billion. The same goes for instance, employed workers. And you see, in this case, the difference goes from 14 to 5 billion. Whereas as to those that receive pensions, the underestimation goes from 10 to 4 billion euros. And it's also interesting to see, for instance, the self-employment income, where in this case we go from 22 billion to nearly 8 billion. And then, just to give you an idea about the improvements in the representativeness of our sample, on the horizontal axis of a chart, we have all of the total amounts that are included in some marginal distributions, not all of them. And the yellow bars represent TDIM, are in absolute terms almost always lower than the red bars that represent the use of the IT silk. And this gives you an idea on the chart of the representativeness of our initial sample. And this is not just for this distribution, but also for other marginal distributions. And this actually concludes my presentation, and I thank you very much and give the floor back to you. Thank you. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Stefano. I think that we are sticking to the schedule. And I like to make a recap because we said a lot of things relating to several items, and we talked about general aspects, and we talked about TDIM, and then we talked about microdata, and also the exogenous aspects of the model, and then we made a focus on the structure by modules, and then the demographic module, and then the migrations module, and then we made these two specific focuses that tell us how we've used a set of information to correct the income for self-employed workers, and then the reweighting and recalibration. And of course, the main thread for this presentation is the analysis behind the scenes of the model. So how we arrange the data we have, and also with a view to the estimation to be done for wealth and pensions. Having said that, I'd like to now give the floor to the discussants within our panel. And if any other discussants want to take the floor, please raise your hands. And I'd like to ask you to please mute your mics, also because this is going to be fundamental for the interpreters. Thank you. And in alphabetical order, and now is Deckers. Please, you have the floor.